Have you ever watched someone lose their absolute mind because their latte had 2 pumps of vanilla instead of 3? Yeah, that's the modern gladiator arena. That's today's battlefield. Not swords, not shields. Just entitlement, insecurity, and oat milk. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you discovered yesterday that your coworker, who does the exact same thing you do, but slower and worse, somehow gets paid £2,000 more a year. And suddenly, you're questioning your entire existence like a medieval monk staring at a solar eclipse. Or maybe you posted something on Instagram and got 37 likes, while Becky, who contributes nothing to society except her eyebrows, got 2,346 posting her breakfast. And instead of saying, "Good for Becky," your inner voice went, "Delete everything, move to a mountain, grow a beard, start over." If any of this sounds familiar, here's the truth you don't want to hear. You're not crazy, you're not broken, you're just playing the status game, and you're losing. But don't worry, so is everyone else. And that brings us to today's book, The Status Game by Will Storr. A brutal, brilliant breakdown of why humans obsess over rank, hierarchy, dominance, prestige, humiliation, and approval, and why you still haven't forgiven that kid who beat you in Year 7's spelling bee. Welcome back to the channel, where we don't just summarize books, we take them apart, insult your belief systems, and hand you back a cleaner, upgraded version of your brain. Today, we're dissecting The Status Game on Social Position and How We Use It by Will Storr. Award-winning journalist, science writer, storyteller, and a man who has spent more time studying human delusion than your Aunt Karen has spent complaining about kids these days. Storr writes for The Guardian, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and other places where people pretend they don't care about status while aggressively competing to seem smarter than everyone else. He's also the author of several acclaimed books, including Selfie, which, yes, is exactly about what you think it is, because humans are narcissistic disasters. Before we continue, a quick and necessary fair use disclaimer. This video is transformative commentary for educational purposes. We're not copying the book. We're interpreting, roasting, expanding, and radically reframing it. Consider this the director's cut on fire version. Now that the lawyers are happy, let's proceed. Storr's point is terrifyingly simple. Life isn't a movie. Life isn't a journey. Life is a game, a status game. And you're playing it whether you want to or not. You play it at work, at home, on social media, at the gym, even while deciding whether to use an iPhone or Samsung. Because let's be honest, both camps think they're better than the other. Humans evolved not just to survive, but to rank themselves and everyone else. We crave acceptance, but once accepted, we need to climb. We want more. More admiration, more approval, more recognition, more status. And the moment we get it, we want more again. Welcome to the treadmill from hell, or as Storr calls it, the flaw in the human condition. This isn't poetry, it's biology. We are status-obsessed apes playing symbolic games of dominance, prestige, and virtue signaling from the moment we wake up to the moment we doom scroll ourselves to sleep. You might think you're rational. You're not. You're a biological Roomba bumping into walls made of ego, insecurity, and tribal instincts. Why this script will hit you in the face? We're not here to politely summarize chapters. We're here to call you out, confront the lies you tell yourself, show you how status manipulation shapes every part of your life, expose the games you didn't know you were playing, and help you stop losing so embarrassingly. This isn't a book summary. This is a psychological intervention. By the end of this series, you will understand every chapter, deeply see the hidden status games you've been trapped in, understand why humanity repeatedly spirals into conflict, humiliation, mobbing, and violence, and most importantly, stop making stupid status-driven decisions that keep you stuck. Also, buy the book, please. It's phenomenal, and Storr deserves the cash, the prestige, and the ego boost. Because hey, status matters, right? If you're ready, we're going to enter the battlefield of human hierarchy, where every compliment, every insult, every promotion, every Instagram post, every political fight, and every meltdown over a parking space is part of one giant ancient game. Let's begin. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. The first move. What if your entire life has been governed by rules you never agreed to, and a game you never knew you were playing? Is not a question, it's a diagnosis. A diagnosis humanity keeps ignoring like a weird rash. And this becomes painfully obvious when you meet someone like Ben Gunn, a man who swung a chair leg in a prison and became in society's eyes less than zero. Not just a criminal, not just a failure, but a status corpse. Let's be honest, modern society loves turning people into nobodies. In the US, all it takes is one bad record. In Europe, it might be the wrong religion or the wrong passport. In parts of Africa or Asia, the wrong tribe, the wrong caste, the wrong gender. In China, you just need a bad social credit score and suddenly you can't even buy train tickets. The game changes, the rules shift, but the punishment is the same. Status death, a silent execution without the ceremony. And that's exactly what Ben Gunn faced. The book shows the details clearly. Locked up, isolated, stripped of identity until even his name felt hollow. That's what the system does. Not just prisons, all systems. Every culture has its own way of saying you no longer matter. Here's what's wild. When people hit that point, they don't stop playing the game. They play harder. Even in hell, humans look for ladders. Even the damned want rank. That's why Ben Gunn reinvented himself inside that cage. He became a jailhouse lawyer. Not because he loved law, not because he suddenly cared about statutes and precedents, but because humans must find a new way to be somebody. If the world takes away your identity, you build a new one out of scrap metal and spite. It's the same reason why people on Twitter, banned from one account, immediately make 3 more. It's why teenagers in Manila grind 14 hours a day in mobile games just to climb one meaningless leaderboard. It's why unemployed men in Italy form tiny online gangs arguing about cryptocurrency they don't even own. Everyone is chasing the same thing Ben Gunn was, a sliver of significance. And here's the part you don't want to hear. You're doing it too. Playing games so invisible, you've mistaken them for your personality. Psychologists call it 2 things, getting along and getting ahead, our evolutionary programming. Storr lays this out clearly in the first chapter, not with jargon, but with that cold, uncomfortable truth the brain hates. Getting along is the survival instinct. Don't get kicked out of the tribe. Getting ahead is the ambition instinct. Don't just survive, dominate. You think you're being moral, rational, authentic. You're not. You're adjusting your behaviors like a social chameleon to avoid being cast out, while simultaneously trying to rise above the people you pretend to like. In Japan, it's the pressure to appear humble while silently competing through achievements. In Nigeria, it's social hierarchy woven into family structures. In South Korea, it's education, beauty, and perfection racing toward burnout. In America, it's career, money, and pretending not to care about either. Different costumes, same biological code. And this is where Storr hits you with the thesis that the rest of the book unpacks. Life is connection first, status second. Everything else, your opinions, your political identities, your hobbies, your dreams, is decoration placed on top of those 2 primal engines. Connection is the oxygen. Status is the dopamine. Meaning is the illusion the brain creates to justify both. That's why people join cults. That's why people radicalize. That's why people become influencers, activists, fanatics, CEOs, trolls, saints, monsters, martyrs, or motivational speakers who call themselves alpha wolves while living in their mom's basement. The game always shows itself eventually. And if you want proof, look at what happens when people lose the game. When economies collapse, status anxiety skyrockets. When inflation rises, crime rises. When housing becomes unaffordable in London, Canada, South Korea, Kenya, and Brazil, young people fall into depression, not because they can't buy property, but because status milestones have been pushed out of reach. When men feel humiliated, some become violent, some join extremist groups, some disappear into conspiracy rabbit holes, and some turn that humiliation inward. Status is not optional, it's structural. You are not escaping the game. You are only choosing whether you understand it or remain controlled by it. Ben Gunn figured this out in prison, with nothing but time and a broken identity. You have the advantage of not being locked in a 4x8 concrete box. Use it, because before you can win any game, you must first realize you're in one. Key idea: humans don't survive by being rational. They survive by playing status games so instinctive they feel like reality. Key takeaway: if you don't understand what game you're playing, someone else is quietly choosing your rank for you. Your culture, your family, your job, your nation, your online tribes. Awareness is the first act of rebellion. Favorite quote: life is connection, then status. The architecture of illusion. What if your reality is a hallucination shared by millions? That's not edgy philosophy, that's biology. Your brain doesn't stream real world live. It constructs one using symbols, stories, and value-laden code you didn't choose, but are forced to play by. According to Will Storr, much of what you think is solid reality, your job title, your university, your car brand, your very identity, is built from imagined symbolic worlds. He argues our brains evolved not just to survive, but to turn chaos into meaning, and the weapon we use is symbols. Imagine you're walking through a city at night, neon signs blinking, social media feeds glowing in your pocket, logos everywhere. What is real? What is value? Your brain decides. It says, that logo means power, that handle means prestige, that building means success. It crafts a world of meaning. But here's the kicker, that world is agreed upon, not discovered. Storr calls these shared hallucinations status symbols. A Cartier watch, a PhD, 50,000 Instagram followers. They're not intrinsically powerful. Their meaning comes from collective belief. Your brain's status detection system reads the cues. Is this symbol accepted by others? Is it prestigious? Do people grant me deference because of it? In different cultures, the symbols change. In Pohnpei, Micronesia, men grow giant yams as prestige objects. In exclusive social circles, symbols might be academic titles, or Twitter followers, or even purity of political belief. What matters is not the object, but the shared value attached to it. But how do these symbolic worlds form rules? According to Storr, we don't just passively accept them, we internalize invisible rule books. From childhood, we're patched with cultural software. We learn what counts, what is admired, what is shameful. In one group, respect may come from obedience, in another, from defiance. These rules don't feel like rules, they feel like the map of reality. Because of these shared hallucinations, we end up living in a dream world. Not a dream in the soft, mystical sense, but a social construct so powerful that it shapes our identity, our morality, and our destinies. We believe in purity, we bleed for brands, we kill and die for symbols, because in our brain's interface, those symbols are everything. Look at global politics. In Europe, some people see economic inequality not just as a material problem, but as a moral failure, because their status game says fairness is the ultimate virtue. In Asia, status games can be coded into education and family honor, where the symbol of having a respected degree or marrying well can supersede any individual's happiness. In the US, status is often tied to wealth, celebrity, or moral virtue. Virtue signaling is a game Storr explores deeply. When someone's virtue becomes a symbol, it's no longer about goodness, it's about rank. And when you see this, you realize something terrifying. Most of what you fight for, feel guilty about, or obsess over is just a shared hallucination. You don't really own your identity because you built it inside someone else's game. That's not just liberating, it's radical. Because once you know that these systems are creations, you gain power. You can stop worshipping arbitrary symbols. You can refuse to invest your worth into other people's value systems. You can begin to play different games. Games that reflect your values, not someone else's illusions. The world you live in isn't the world that exists. It's the world you and others agree to imagine. Key idea. Our perception of reality, what we call society, success, identity, is built on invented symbols and shared hallucinations, not objective truths. Key takeaway. Once you see status as symbolic and constructed, you gain the freedom to redefine the game for yourself, to pick or create status systems that actually mean something to you. Favorite quote. We build an infinite variety of imaginary games. Groups of people gather together, agree what symbols they're going to use to mean status, then strive to achieve it. The Trinity of Games. There are 3 games in human life, and once you see them, you'll never unsee them again. That's not motivational fluff. That's the bottomless truth Will Storr pulls out and holds like a grenade. He argues that every human society runs 3 core status games: prestige or success, dominance, and virtue. These ancient engines churn beneath our daily dramas, whether we realize it or not. First, there's prestige, or what Storr calls the success game, the game of the admired. This is the realm of skill, innovation, mastery. Think of scientists landing rockets, artists painting canvases, or engineers building life-changing machines. Our brains evolved to give status to people who actually know things. In many Western societies, this is the ideal. Climb the ladder by being good at something. What you accomplish, how smart you are, how much you contribute, that's your currency. Then there's dominance, the darker, more primal game, the game of the feared. This isn't about appreciation, it's about coercion, force, intimidation. This is the very ancient pathway shared with our primate cousins, status by strength, by threat, by power. Storr reminds us that dominance isn't extinct just because we live in polished cities. Authoritarian regimes, criminal gangs, toxic corporations, they're all playgrounds for this game. And men, especially young men, he argues, are particularly vulnerable to it. A grandiose ego plus humiliation equals a lethal mix. Finally, there's virtue, the game of the pure. More modern, more insidious. Here, status is earned by being good, morally righteous, dutiful, sacrificial, obedient to shared moral codes. Virtue games are everywhere in religion, activism, and ideological groups. But Storr warns that virtue status isn't innocent, it's powerful. Your purity becomes a trophy. Your moral superiority becomes currency. People will shout you louder, deify you, or cancel you based on these moral signifiers. And because virtue is so symbolic, it can combine with dominance, where the morally righteous wield coercion over the impure. Storr doesn't just describe these games, he points to a terrifying consequence: humiliation. To someone playing dominance or virtue, being publicly shamed, stripped of respect, or exposed as unworthy is not just embarrassing, it's existential. It's the opposite of status. And when that happens, some people don't rebuild. They lash out or self-destruct. He quotes an African proverb: "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth." For some, the return isn't reconciliation, it's annihilation. When the game rejects them, the only way back may be through dominance. a destructive resurrection. Globally, we can already see this play out. Look at political movements in countries where young men feel humiliated economically. They turn to aggressive populists. In parts of Europe, economic stagnation and social decay make dominance politics feel like the only way to regain worth. In religious or ideological communities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, virtue contests drive moral purges and radicalism. Only the pure get status, they say, until dissenters are exiled or worse. What's most brutal is how these games intersect. A tech CEO might dominate by crushing competition, dominance, innovate brilliantly, prestige, and position themselves as morally virtuous, virtue. These mixed games are layered, lethal, and often invisible. Storr warns, leadership rooted in dominance is volatile and fragile. It demands constant fear. Leadership from prestige is more sustainable, but virtue leadership, it can mutate into a tyrannical machine when combined with dominance, especially when people are desperate for moral validation. Here's what he really means. We're not just competing to be rich, smart, or ethical. We're all playing these three games at once, and whichever game we lean into most, that's what shapes how we behave, who we admire, and how history bends. Key idea: human status seeking boils down to three fundamental games: prestige, dominance, and virtue, each with its own rules, rewards, and dangers. Key takeaway: recognizing which game, or mix of games you're playing, is the first step to breaking free, or at least choosing the game you want to win. Favorite quote: humiliation can be seen as the opposite of status, the hell to its heaven. How games rewrite us. What if you aren't choosing your behavior, but following an invisible script you didn't write? Because that's how humans operate, more often than they admit. The louder they protest free will, the deeper they're trapped in status wiring. Once you understand that status games aren't optional extras, but neurological architectures, you start seeing modern life for what it is: a vast slot machine rigged to reward conformity, reward duplicity, not truth, not integrity. Research proves it. In a 2025 study by a team at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, scientists found that social rank literally rewires the brain. Among rodents, lower-ranking males had a wired-to-reward dopamine system stronger than their brake circuit. They were far more likely to seek methamphetamine. High-ranking animals had a more balanced neural setup, better self-control, less addictive drive. Change an individual's rank through experience, and you change the brain's wiring. That's not metaphor, that's biology. Social status doesn't just shape your life, it shapes your neurons. So when you log into Instagram and refresh the feed hoping for likes, when you check emails hoping for praise, that's your brain playing the hierarchy slot machine. Every like, upvote, comment, promotion, approval, a dopamine hit. Sometimes big, sometimes small. Sometimes enough to keep you here, anxious, looking for more. Our brains are primed for two things: survival and rank. The problem is, modern life rewards status addiction more than survival. We are constantly judged, constantly compared, constantly ranked, and our dopamine system burns fuel every time we win, every time we lose. But there's more. Because we live in groups, in overlapping networks of family, work, tribe, religion, nationality, we don't just compete alone. We participate in hierarchies that demand conformity. That's where universal prejudice comes in. Studies show that even children, as young as 4, when assigned artificially high or low group status, internalize hierarchy-reinforcing beliefs. They claim the hierarchy is fair. They defend status for their group. They exclude outsiders. What that tells us is alarming. Status-based prejudice isn't a byproduct of culture. It's a feature baked into the social brain. We aren't born fair. We're born wired to evaluate, compare, exclude. And modern societies, with media, social media, borders, tribal ideologies, weaponize that wiring. And when you combine a dopamine-driven hunger for status with a brain wired to privilege insiders, you get systems that reward stability more than truth, that punish dissent, silence outsiders, uphold orthodoxy. Look at institutions, multinational corporations, political parties, religions, social media platforms. Rarely do they reward honest questions, deep thinking, or inconvenient truths. Instead, they reward loyalty, compliance, status signaling, virtue flashes, or dominance maneuvers. That's the flaw in the system. Systems designed by humans to preserve power, not to pursue truth. When the rules change, who rises changes. Give dominance-based rewards, and bullies rise. Give virtue-based rewards, and moral crusaders rise. Give prestige-based rewards, and masters or craftsmen rise. Change the scoreboard, you change the winners. That's why revolutions seldom topple hierarchies. They just reboot them, because the game remains, the rules change, but the need for status stays. In 2025, global inequality hasn't just created desperate economies, it has fueled social breakdowns, addiction crises, mass disillusionment. Young people in many countries feel they have no future. They cannot get the status signals their grandparents got with stable jobs, housing, respect. So they look for shortcuts, fast money, extremist groups, online tribalism, anything that gives a quick dopamine-driven status tick. When you realize that, you realize you're not the person you think you are. You're the person your game requires you to be. Change the rules, change the player, but few who make the game allow that. Key idea. Social status isn't just metaphorical. It rewires our brain, shapes behavior, and enslaves us to invisible reward systems. Therefore, status games determine who we become more than conscious choice. Key takeaway: recognizing the psychology and neurobiology behind social status gives you a rare chance, not to win the current game, but to step outside it, question its rules, and choose a different one for yourself. Favorite quote: your dopamine doesn't care about truth. It only knows the slot machine, the reward, the hit, the next pull. Dream makers and dream takers. What if your personality isn't really you, but the product of the game you were born into? Because that's how history, culture, and status work on humans, not as individuals, but as players in civilizations, living dreams others built, each with its own scoreboard. From the flat deserts of ancient Egypt to the towering glass of Silicon Valley, societies have repeatedly rewritten the rules of status, reshuffling who gets to win. What we often call culture, society, or progress is really just the machinery that creates new status games, with new players, new symbols, and new stakes. As the status game argues, human civilizations aren't accidents of nature. They are status generators. When you're born, your brain doesn't come with a manual. It gets programmed by parents, communities, languages, myths, religions, schools, by rituals and taboos and legends. You don't choose the game chooses you. The stories you hear as a child, the heroes, the villains, the sacred rules, are the rules of a status game. And when you grow up, you become a player. Think about modern examples. In Western urban society, success might be measured by wealth, education, a big house, a fancy job. In other parts of the world, say rural Papua New Guinea, the status game might still revolve around community respect, traditional rituals, or dominance within a tribe, but both are the same structure. A shared dream, coded in symbols, where players scramble for rank. This is not incidental, it's structural. In the age of globalization and social media, these status games not only overlap, they collide. A college dropout in Lagos, Nigeria might see the American success game via TikTok and try to live by it. A teenager in Seoul might feel inferior to influencers in Los Angeles, even though she has nothing in common with them. Entire societies end up chasing status games designed for someone else and losing. Because humans don't just inhabit culture, they become it. The book explains how our sense of identity, morality, belief, even what feels real is shaped by the status games we play. Look at global politics today. We see revolutions, uprisings, cultural shifts from Latin America to Southeast Asia, from Europe to Africa. Often these aren't just fights over resources or oppression, they're contests between conflicting status games. One group wants to rise through modern economic success, another wants to reclaim traditional social prestige, a third demands moral or ideological purity. What looks like a protest? It's a status game reboot. Take, for instance, the recent labor and cost of living protests across Europe. While the headlines talk about wages or inflation, underneath runs a deeper anxiety about social rank. Young people watching their parents lose economic status, wondering if the next generation will even have the baseline respect, job stability, home, family, once taken for granted. In that anxiety, new status games are born, ones based on activism, online identity, or radical ideology. And when these games grow, when many people join them, they become cultural machines. They reshape societal values, rewrite morality, recast what successful life means. The dreams you once took for granted, stable job, degree, home, pension, become fragile and contested. The new game rewards different skills, digital influence, activism, moral signaling, shifting identities. This is powerful, dangerously powerful, because when a culture's status game changes, the players may not survive. People become alienated, depressed, radicalized. Some groups double down on the old game and lash out. Others chase the new game with fanatic intensity. And this is how civilizations, once united under one dream, fracture. Old gods die, new idols rise. Entire social maps are redrawn. What was once sacred becomes despised. What was once shameful becomes heroic. Because culture doesn't just shape what you believe. Culture shapes what you are allowed to be. It defines the boundaries of your identity, of your value, and demands your loyalty to the dream. Once you see that, you realize your choices aren't always really yours. They're the rules of the game you were born into. Key idea: civilizations and cultures are not backdrops. They're status machines. They build players, define the game, and determine who wins. Key takeaway: to reclaim your agency, recognize the cultural code you're living under, and question whether you want to keep playing the old game or write a new one for yourself. Favorite quote: we become the games we play. Gold, blood, and glory. What if humans keep burning down entire worlds the moment status becomes unreachable? Not because we hate civilization, but because the game demands it. Because here's the brutal truth. When status is the prize, chaos doesn't mean defeat. Chaos is just another move on the board. In the status game, humans' hunger for rank, for more than just safety, can push entire societies toward destruction. On one hand, the gold rush psychology. Scarcity plus opportunity equals frenzy. When societies collapse, when inequality hits a tipping point, when old status games break down, people don't just slump into despair. They scramble, they fight, they raid, they revolt, they hunt status by any means left. And maybe that's why in 2025 we see so many flashpoints across Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe. Instability snowballs into conflict. Conflict becomes war. War becomes despair. According to a new global survey by communications firm Edelman, 60% of people across 28 countries now say economic grievances make them open to hostile actions, including violence or destruction. Among younger people, 18 to 34, that number rises to 53%, because if society owes you a future and then takes it away, the mind looks for justice in chaos. The old game breaks. The only play left is destruction or disruption. Storr calls this the status reset, chaos as a mechanism for rewriting rankings. Historically, wars, revolutions, and mass unrest have served that function. Conquerors don't just kill people, they annihilate status, old rulers, old elites, old codes. Then they redistribute rank among the winners. The winners get glory, power, resources. The losers get shame, debt, maybe death. Take what's happening now in certain conflict-ridden regions. In countries where resources are scarce, governance weak, and inequality extreme, conflict becomes not just a byproduct, but a tool for status. The global data shows a grim trend. In the 39 economies marked as conflict-affected or fragile, per capita GDP has shrunk since 2020, while extreme poverty is rising fast there, now home to nearly 60% of the world's extremely poor. That collapse doesn't just hit wallets, it hits identities, dignity, status. For many, if they can't get respect through work or contribution, they'll try to get it through force, fear, tribal loyalty. Because in a broken status game, dominance becomes the only currency left. Storr points out that violence, coercion, dominance are ancient, embedded deep in our primate heritage. Even as technology advances, as empires rise and fall, this primal wiring remains. In the chaos, you'll see old alliances crumble and new coalitions form. Family clans, warlords, faction tribes, ideological gangs. Cousins and coalitions, he calls them, because when formal institutions fail, people fall back on blood, tribe, shared history, or shared grievance. That's why many modern wars, from Africa to Asia, erupt along ethnic, tribal, or regional lines, rather than economic or ideological ones. People turn to what status they can control or reclaim. The tragic irony: victims become warriors, the oppressed become oppressors, the hunted become hunters. Old divisions blur, new myths are born. People tell themselves stories of reclaiming honor, justice, vengeance, because in the absence of peaceful status games, war becomes the ultimate reset button. Take the ongoing humanitarian catastrophes across conflict zones: famine, hunger, displacement. A recent report found that extreme poverty is skyrocketing in war-torn economies, forced displacements, destroyed infrastructure, broken markets, lives reduced to survival. In many places, the future is dead, and yet for some, that despair becomes a ladder, a twisted opportunity, a chance to grab power, wealth, and rank that the old system denied them. Storr argues that many insurgencies, radical movements, genocides, and violent revolutions are nothing more than failed status games escalated to the level of murder and mass destruction. Look around. 2025 is full of warning signs. Economic inequality just exploded. The richest 1% have gained trillions since 2015, while aid cuts, rising prices, and inflation bite hard for the rest. Governments that can't manage inequality, climate crises, or public trust increasingly slip into legitimacy crises. In that vacuum, dominance players, warlords, strongmen, extremist groups don't just appear, they get invited. When systems fail you, they always ask, do you want justice or revenge? And if justice feels unreachable, revenge becomes morality. So what's the lesson Storr drives home? And what does real-world 2025 tell us? If you tie your hopes to a fragile system, a failing economy, unstable institutions, shaky peace, then the only stable currency becomes fear, dominance, violence. When the game collapses around you, chaos becomes the only way to rescore. That means whenever the game feels unwinnable, humans flip the board. Key idea: When legitimate status pathways collapse through inequality, instability, economic breakdown, or institutional failure, humans often turn to dominance and violence, using chaos as a status reset. Key takeaway: systems built on unequal status distribution and fragile hope are ticking bombs. If you want stability, you must design status games that don't reward desperation, but resilience, or else chaos becomes the default. Favorite quote: if the game rejects you, you can return in dominance as a vengeful god, using deadly violence to force the game to attend to you in humility. Descent into the dream fog. What if the world you think you're living in is just someone else's dream and you forgot how to wake up? Because that's what happens when the status game stops being something you play and becomes something you believe. When the constructed symbols, the invented prestige hierarchies, the social illusions turn into reality. And once that slippage happens, your mind, your identity, your morality all become parts of the dream. In the status game, Storr warns that status obsession isn't just personal, it's collective. It builds not just players, but entire psychological worlds that can trap you. Those worlds are often more compelling than actual reality. Symbols, reputations, online followings, they feel more real than relationships, more meaningful than truth. As Storr puts it, social media is a slot machine for status. Consider this: vast swathes of people now spend hours each day scrolling, refreshing, posting, not because they love expression, but because they're addicted to the status hits. A like, a share, a follower, small, but enough to trigger the primitive brain's reward system. And just like addiction, the reward never lasts. Once you get one hit, you want more. There is no plateau, only cravings. That alone warps reality. Suddenly, your value isn't what you do, but how many others pretend to care about what you say. Your self-worth depends on an algorithm. Your identity depends on a feed. And because these status-generating machines are global, digital, and algorithmically optimized for engagement, they reward not truth, but extremity, outrage, toxicity. Research into echo chambers on social media shows exactly this pattern. Once you're surrounded only by people who confirm your beliefs and feed your status illusions, you polarize, you radicalize, you lose grip on nuance, on empathy, on reality. Recent global data supports this danger. A 2025 report from a team at the Drive Project studying terrorism and radicalization across Europe found that radicalization often isn't the product of individual traumatic events, but arises when people feel excluded, alienated, treated as outsiders. Isolation, identity void, and a craving for status turn them toward extremist communities that promise meaning. It's social engineering under the guise of belonging. In these communities, the game morphs. Dissent becomes heresy. Questioning becomes betrayal. Virtue or purity becomes currency. And once purity is the goal, the spiral can make even decent people into zealots. As Storr describes, movements turn into machines of moral judgment, a cycle of condemnation, suspicion, paranoia, and exclusion. Once you pass a threshold, truth doesn't matter anymore. What matters is not whether a claim is real, but whether it boosts your status within the group. Reality becomes subordinate to identity, and identity becomes a fortress built on lies, fear, and group delusion. You lose reality, you lose perspective, you lose yourself. Look around. 2025 shows us the consequences. On one side, governments struggle with rising hate speech, conspiracies, radicalism on alternative social media platforms. Recent studies reveal that these platforms, with minimal moderation, have become echo chamber factories where extremist ideology festers and spreads under the radar. On the youth front, youth radicalization studies reveal a troubling connection. Loneliness, marginalization, identity vacuum, plus daily exposure to extremist content is a toxic cocktail. Many who drift into radical groups aren't criminals. They're searching for status, validation, meaning. This isn't some online problem. It's an evolutionary pressure playing out in the digital jungle. The same pressure that once pushed humans to hunt mammoths, now pushing humans to hunt reputations, narratives, ideological purity. Those who win these games don't always become stronger. Sometimes they become hollow. Sometimes they become violent. Sometimes they lose themselves. And the worst part, you can win, but lose your soul. You might get followers, likes, applause, but your mind, your humanity, gone. Because in a world built on illusions, the first casualty is reality, and the second casualty is you. Key idea: when status becomes obsession, fueled by social media, group identity, and exclusion, entire social realities shift. Truth becomes secondary, purity becomes status, and people lose themselves to collective hallucinations that punish dissent and reward extremism. Key takeaway: once you recognize that your beliefs and identity might be shaped not by reality, but by status-driven illusions, you regain the power to step out, challenge the dream fog, refuse the script, and find clarity. Favorite quote: social media is a slot machine for status. Walking out of hell. You can escape any game, but not by winning it. Because the game was never meant for you to win. It was built to keep you alive, compliant, climbing, forever. Escape isn't about victory. Escape is about walking sideways. When you finally step off the conveyor belt of status, that treadmill of promotions, likes, prestige, comparisons, it feels like collapse. Because your identity collapses with it. The status game isn't just a contest outside your skin, it's coded into you. Remove the external applause and people nodding your way, and many of us feel naked, lost, unanchored. Storr explains that status is treated by your brain like oxygen or water. Lose it, even if just socially, and your body reacts as if you're starving. That's why so many people who walk away from their job, their social circle, or their previous identity go through a psychological breakdown. It's not just a midlife crisis, it's a de-ranking of identity, and our brains are hardwired to panic. Modern life makes this worse. The rise of self-tracking apps, productivity culture, hyper-performance demands, constant self-optimization pushes us into what some psychologists call the neoliberal self. You are told, be perfect, be efficient, be productive, never rest, never admit weakness, always grow, always improve, because your worth is the sum of your output, and output is a proxy for status. A 2024 report on perfectionism and mental health found that this mindset is quietly destroying people. Constant pressure to perform, fear of failure, never feeling good enough, all tied to anxiety, depression, burnout. The ironic twist: what was sold to you as self-improvement is another cage, one even harder to see, because it looks like ambition, it feels like virtue. That's hell. A status game you can't win, but can't stop playing. So how do you walk out? Not by climbing to the top, not by winning, by shifting the game, by reframing what counts as status. First, reconnect, real connection, not the shallow currency of likes or followers, but messy, real, human relationships. Imperfect, unpredictable, unscorable. Those build identity that isn't fragile to fluctuations in external validation. Second, rewrite your story. Recognize that you don't have to be defined by the old scoreboard, the career, the degree, the social rank. There are other games, quieter, slower, but real. Creativity, kindness, integrity, building something that doesn't broadcast for praise. Even for those games, status may exist, but it feels different, grounded, durable. Third, choose different status sources. Instead of external affirmation, aim for internal value. Build resilience by valuing your own growth, your own standards, your own version of meaning, not the one sold by culture, corporations, or social media. Storr doesn't pretend it's easy, because it's not. The architecture of social status is inside you. Your body craves validation, your brain is addicted to approval. Walking away feels like suffocating, like freedom and fear at once, but there's power in that collapse, because when the status game scoreboard disappears, that's where you get to ask real questions. Who am I if I'm not climbing? What matters if not rank? What kind of life is worth building if not the one everyone can applaud? If you want to escape hell, you don't climb, you walk sideways. Key idea. Escaping toxic status games often means losing the identity built around them, but real freedom lies in redefining status on your own terms, reconnecting with authentic values, and embracing internal meaning over external validation. Key takeaway. You cannot win your way out of a system designed to keep you dependent. Instead, real escape comes from stepping off, shifting to different games, values, and measures of worth that aren't dictated by collective applause. Favorite quote, "To our brains, status is a resource as real as oxygen or water. When we lose it, we break." The collision point. All conflict begins the same way, when two players believe they're the hero. Because every fight, every riot, every revolution isn't just about resources or ideology, it's about status, about who gets to be seen as worthy, righteous, dominant. When two groups' status games collide, reality fractures. As the status game shows, when people perceive unfairness, that the system is rigged, that the winners are getting richer while the rest are being pushed out, the pressure cracks. That sense of injustice becomes the fuse under a social bomb. Recent global data confirms this. A 2025 survey by Edelman revealed 60% of people across 28 countries now carry deep economic grievances, distrust toward government, business, and elites, and a worrying 40% say violent or hostile actions may be needed to force change. Among younger people, 18 to 34, support for hostile measures jumps to 53%. That's a society flirting with ignition. When people believe the game is rigged, they stop playing by the rules and start rewriting them with fire. But what fuels that discontent beyond money? Perception. Because it isn't always actual inequality that drives rage, it's the belief of unfairness. In Europe and beyond, researchers have documented how perception of inequality strongly correlates with support for populist anti-establishment parties. In other words, when enough people believe the scoreboard is broken, they don't demand fair play, they demand a new scoreboard. And often, that scoreboard comes with guns, chants, mobs, or online mobs. What really breaks us isn't just inequality, it's the sense that life was never meant to be fair, that the game was designed to win by a few from the start. Once you realize that, resistance ceases to be optional, it becomes inevitable. Two worldviews crash. Those who believe in the old system, however unjust, and those who believe the game itself must be destroyed or remade. That clash doesn't produce compromise. It produces conflict, violence, revolt, tribalism, collapse, and the results are messy, brutal, often catastrophic. Look at recent riots in Britain and elsewhere. Social inequality, economic despair, and the perception of a rigged game have triggered eruptions of anger, looting, destruction. Look at the rise of populist governments across Europe, Asia, Latin America, exploiting grievance, manipulating perceptions, promising to flip the scoreboard overnight. Analysts increasingly cite perceived inequality, not just actual, as the driving force behind political polarization and radicalism. And once these games take shape, morality itself becomes weaponized. The old moral compass, fairness, justice, empathy, dissolves into group loyalty, revenge, us versus them. social bonds fracture, empathy collapses, people begin to accept, even applaud, violence if it means a status win for their team. Social psychologists studying radicalization note, perceived unfairness, especially when combined with group identity and social exclusion, drastically increases the probability of violent or extremist behavior. That means what begins as grievance or protest can snowball into tribal war, offline, online, across borders. Once you see the world as two moral universes, yours versus theirs, compromise is no longer the goal. Domination is. Maybe that's why 2025 feels like a powder keg, because millions believe fairness died long ago, because many see violence not as a failure, but the only remaining tool to rewrite the game, because the scoreboard feels rigged. And here's the brutal, uncomfortable truth. You can't fix a broken game by playing it. You can't reform a system built on unfair hierarchies by demanding equal opportunity. When the underlying code is corrupted, the only real fix is to rewrite the code, to acknowledge that the game itself is the problem. Until then, conflict will continue, protests, uprisings, revolutions, cultural wars, because when fairness breaks, worlds crack, and when worlds crack, dreams collide. Key idea, perceived injustice, not just actual inequality, can ignite status wars that morph into social breakdowns, populism, radicalization, and violence. When multiple moral universes clash, compromise collapses. Key takeaway, understanding conflict requires seeing the underlying status games, not just politics, economics, or identity, but the invisible scoreboards. Without that, every attempt at reconciliation is a cosmetic fix on structural rot. Favorite quote, all conflict begins the same way, when two players believe they're the hero. The 7 moves that change everything. You can't stop playing the game of life, but you can choose how you play, because if you believe the system was rigged from birth, if you accept that status games run your life, then the only question left is, are you going to be a pawn or a master of your own rules? Storr ends his book not with despair, but with possibility. The possibility that you might change how you play, or what counts as a win. He offers a kind of 7-move decoder ring to flip the script, a chance to convert what's usually a race toward comparison into a path toward meaning, resilience, and connection. First move, escape zero-sum games. Status often acts like a zero-sum economy. When someone wins, someone else loses. But it doesn't have to be this way. As ethical systems thinkers highlight, many of the status resources we chase, respect, trust, meaningful contribution, can expand without taking from others. Treating every interaction as competition, instead make value. Build systems where more doesn't mean someone else has less. That shift can transform a toxic rivalry into a cooperative ladder. Second move, play for mastery, not applause. Instead of chasing applause, followers, or prestige, chase competence, craft, depth. Real mastery, skills, craft, understanding, offers a more stable form of status. It doesn't fluctuate with opinions, trends, or algorithms. As one reviewer of Storr's book puts it, competence plus sincerity plus warmth tends to outlast cruelty or shallow dominance. When you aim for mastery, you anchor yourself in something real, something you own, not someone else's applause. Third move, choose better tribes. Status games only shape you as much as the groups you join. If you join tribes built on cruelty, scarcity, shame, or fear, the game will shape you into someone bitter, insecure, or worse. But if you join tribes built on genuine respect, growth, integrity, you give yourself a fighting chance. Storr argues that group-based status doesn't have to be about dominance or moral purity. It can be about contribution, support, mutual respect. That's a healthier system. Fourth move, protect your identity. Status games demand adaptation, but often at the cost of authenticity. If you pour yourself into someone else's rules, you lose your own map. So safeguard your identity. Know what you stand for independently of the scoreboard. Don't let external approval become the measure of your worth. That means be aware of what you chase and why. Ask, is this my value or someone else's illusion? Fifth move, reward real connection. Real human connection, empathy, trust, mutual support is status too. And it's one of the few forms that don't undermine others. Psychological and social health research tends to show that quality relationships, respect within a community, and social belonging strongly predict well-being and longevity. Investing in those bonds rather than status tokens builds a safety net against the endless treadmill of comparison. Sixth move, become status resilient. Status can vanish in a moment. Algorithms change, institutions collapse, opinions shift. So the most stable strategy is resilience. Don't base your mental health, identity, or self-worth on status that can be revoked. Diversify your games. Anchor yourself in multiple values and communities. Keep building competence and connection outside of fame or external validation. As Storr suggests, play many games. Don't tie your identity to a single scoreboard. Seventh move, play games that lift others too. Maybe the least obvious, but probably most radical move. Use your status currency to elevate others, because giving status doesn't deplete you. It expands the trust, the empathy, the cooperation network. It builds culture, not just competition. Storr sees value in prestige gained through generosity, kindness, meaningful work, not just dominance or empty achievement. When you redefine winning, you rewrite the game. But ideas without action are empty. Here's how to spot toxic games and move into healthier ones. Watch for zero-sum setups. If every victory feels like someone else's loss or success depends on others' failure, that's a red flag. Notice what you chase after. Are you after followers, fame, approval, or competence, connection, fulfillment? Test the tribe. Does the group thrive on fear, shaming, performance, or trust, support, real work? Track your internal state. If success brings anxiety, emptiness, or self-doubt, maybe you're playing a hollow game. If it brings quiet satisfaction, maybe mastery status fits you better. See what you're building. Are you building ego, envy, division, or empathy, resilience, community? Because in the end, the ultimate move is not to keep fighting for status, but to generate it for others. Not by climbing over them, but by elevating them. That's not weakness, that's not surrender, that's evolution. Because maybe, just maybe, the winners of the status game aren't the ones with the most followers, the loudest voice, or the biggest trophy case. The winners are those who stop trying to win and start trying to raise the world around them. Key idea, status doesn't have to be a zero-sum trap. By shifting how we define and seek status, we can transform it into a source of connection, meaning, and collective uplift instead of envy, competition, and division. Key takeaway, you might never fully escape the human craving for status, but you can reclaim it, play smarter, play for growth, and play in ways that build, not destroy. Favorite quote, never forget you are dreaming. The aim is to play, not win. Conclusion, you can't stop playing the game of life, but you can choose how you play. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Every promotion you chase, every scroll on social media, every argument, every cause, every fight, every we're better than them, or I'm more moral than you, isn't about truth, it's about status. We dug deep. We traced the roots from cage cells to idols, from tribal rights to social media mobs. We saw how humans didn't just build societies, they built status machines. Systems that shape your brain, your identity, your morality, engineered to reward compliance, aggression, virtue, or excellence. depending on whose rules you play by. We saw how even when you think you're above it, you're still playing, because status isn't optional. It's embedded in our biology, our culture, our religions, our economies. High status meant better resources, mates, protection. Low status meant exclusion or death. We saw how status can drive brilliance, innovation, mastery, art, discovery, but also horror, war, cruelty, genocide, collapse. When status games twist moral code or hijack identity, monsters are born. We saw how in the modern age, those games are everywhere, in the algorithms feeding our feeds, in the ideologies tearing societies apart, in the silent craving for approval that haunts so many. Science now confirms social media isn't just distraction, it's a dopamine machine for status, and if you feed it, it rewires your reward system. So when the author offers a choice, not to quit the game, but to rewrite it, that's the most radical idea of all. Because real power isn't in dominating the game, it's in changing the game. Forget chasing followers, titles, applause, or temporary prestige. Instead, build competence, build connection, build meaning, join tribes that lift, not tear. Create value that doesn't depend on envy, fear, or cruelty. Trade status tokens not for more status, but for purpose. Because the only way to beat the system isn't by being on top of it. It's by refusing to play by its rules. When you do that, or you don't just survive, you transcend. You don't become a king in someone else's castle. You build your own home. So here's the challenge. Look in the mirror. Ask yourself, which game am I playing? Who wrote the rules? Do I want their win or my own version of winning? If most answers come from fear, desperation, envy, insecurity, you're playing someone else's game. Time to walk sideways, time to write new rules, time to become a different kind of player. If you only take one thing from this book, let it be this. Status isn't your enemy. Unconscious status, games are. Choose consciously, play meaningfully, build something real, because in the end, the winners of the status game aren't the loudest. They're not the richest, the most famous, the most feared. They're the ones who stop trying to win and start trying to elevate the world around them. Go buy the book, read it, because once you see the game, you can't unsee it, but maybe, just maybe, you can reshape it. See you in the next round.